Everything is meaningless. The basic human need is the drive for meaning. People who have no reason in their minds, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? So that question has not been answered in the lives of so many people. With regard to Hubble's discovery, Allah said in Surah Al-Dhariyat, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. The heaven, we created it with might, and we are expanding it. And the form of the word musi'un, it indicates an action that's going on in the present and will continue into the future. And that idea that the heavens are expanding was completely against the science at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Even up until the time of Einstein, it was against what everybody held, the view that everybody had about the heavens. The heavens are fixed. So when Einstein was dealing with the theory of relativity, he saw that the implications of his theory were that the heavens are not fixed. And he said, wait a minute, that can't be right. So he came up with a concept that he called the cosmological constant, which he added to his equations in order to make things turn out the way he thought they should be, which is that the universe doesn't expand, that it's fixed. And then when Hubble published his discoveries, Einstein, he was quoted as saying that the cosmological constant was probably my biggest mistake when it came to theoretical physics. So anyway, the Quran mentioned that centuries, more than a millennium before there was any physical evidence to support that view. And in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah said, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. Will not those who reject faith consider, or don't they know, or literally don't they see, that the heavens and the earth were once a compact mass, and then we split them asunder. And the word fataqa can also mean to tear something open or to unstitch it, to rip it apart. So, I mean, that's an extraordinary verse when you look at the precision of the use of language, and also who exactly is being addressed in this verse. The rejectors of faith at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, did they have any basis on which to believe that the heavens and the earth were once a compact mass that was then split asunder? No. It was in the 20th century that people actually saw, and through Hubble's telescope, they saw evidence for that issue. So, I mean, we as Muslims, and we see this as one of those miraculous aspects of the Quran. So the Big Bang Theory, which seems to be heavily supported by physical evidence, and the Quran also would support it, it clearly gives an indication that the universe had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, then it had a creator. So that's a problem for people who are committed to the idea that there is no God. So what do you do? How do you respond to this? How do you interpret this evidence and this theory in a way which will then reopen the door for the idea that nature and matter and the universe is eternal? One of the more well-known solutions to that problem is what they call the big crunch theory. They said, okay, yeah, the universe is expanding, but it's going to slow down as things get further and further apart. And then, at a certain point, the mass of the universe will pull it all back together again until it becomes, it'll disappear into this blinding flash, and then there will be nothingness, and then bam, there will be another Big Bang. These are just old theories being recycled. I mean, this is very, very similar to Hindu and Buddhist concepts about the cyclical nature of the universe. So, okay, you as a scientist, you've taken this concept from a religion. What evidence do you have for it? There was a scientific attempt to actually settle that question. In the late 90s, they put up a telescope that was intended to measure very, very precisely the irregularities in the background cosmic radiation that scientists believe is left over from the Big Bang. And based on these very, very precise measurements, they could arrive at some sense of the shape of the universe. And if it was a certain shape, then that would support the idea that it'll just keep expanding forever. And if it's a different shape, then it will support the idea that it'll stop at a certain point and then come back together. And the results of that particular investigation into reality were that it looks like it's just going to keep on expanding forever. I don't know, this information is a couple of years old, so I don't know what they found out since then, but that idea that there will be a big crunch doesn't seem to be supported by any evidence. That second concept, that the universe is eternal and thus self-existent, also led them to a third concept, which is that it's self-directed. Allah said, I will show them my signs in the horizons and in themselves. So when we look at ourselves, we see that what we have in common with every living creature is DNA, basically. Every living creature has DNA in it, or RNA. In both cases, what you have is a coding system. It is information, which is stored in a chemical form, using a chemical language consisting of 4 letters, 2 sets of pairs. This chemical will only combine with that chemical, and this chemical will only combine with this chemical. So when computer programmers were comparing their field with biology, they said DNA is like a binary code. And computer programs don't write themselves. You have to have a programmer. If you have random generation of symbols, you will never get a working computer program from that. And in fact, there was, this is, to me, it's like the compartmentalization of thinking. They had a project that was started in the 1960s called the SETI project, the generic Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Okay, so they have this huge radio telescope in Puerto Rico, which they were focusing on different stars. And the whole idea was, we're going to monitor the radio waves, the microwaves, etc., to see if there's any non-random information, non-random signals coming from anywhere that we point this telescope towards. If it's non-random, that's a very powerful indication that there's something intelligent out there sending out those waves. If it's random, then okay, it's just crackle, static from stars or pulsars or whatever. If it's not random, it's a sign of intelligence. And here in our bodies and throughout every living thing, we have this code. It's not insignificant. The quantity of information in this code is tremendous. If I remember correctly, it's like 6 billion base pairs in the human genome. And they said that an example to make it, to help us understand it, they said if you take the DNA from one human cell and you were to just express, if you were to use written language, one letter for each of those 4 chemical bases that make up the information in DNA. So you just have 4 letters, and you just write that out in book form, 12-point font. It will be 1,000 volumes, not just 1,000 volumes, each 500 pages. And if you were to take all the DNA and do that for every cell in the human body, it would fill up the Grand Canyon more than 50 times. So what, is there intelligence involved in producing this code? And not just intelligence, but what a refined intelligence. What intelligence it takes to write that much information on a point smaller than the point, not the head of a pin, the point of the pin. So subhanallah. With regard to the second issue, which is that nature is a seamless whole, and there's no room in this philosophy for something outside, and obviously no room for God. There's an incredible quote. Harun Yahya, may Allah reward him, he came across this quote and reproduced it in one of his books. The quote is from a professor, I believe, of biology, anyway, something to do with philosophy of science. His article, which was in the New York Times Review of Books, has to do with the philosophy of science. And he made this statement, which I'll just read out to you. I don't want to misquote him. It is not that the methods and the institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, so we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So just now I'll paraphrase it to make it simpler. There's nothing in the evidence to indicate that you have to have a purely material explanation for the world around us. No, we, those who are with him in this point of view, we started with a decision. We decided that there's no God and that there is only material. After that, everything we find, we fit it into that framework, even if evidence would indicate otherwise. So, because we're committed not to allowing a divine foot in the door. So, I mean, that's an extraordinary admission from a practitioner of that philosophy. What, from my point of view, we might call one of the high priests of that religion. With regard to that third issue, that natural laws cannot be overridden, of course, we as Muslims, we don't accept that. We don't believe that, that Allah is the kind of God who created the universe as a sort of a machine and then went off and left it to run on its own. Basically, there's a system of the sunan of Allah, the way in which His universe works, which is based on these laws. These natural laws, we believe they do exist, but that Allah has the power to override them. And that's one of the lessons in the Quran. The fire became cool and peaceful for Ibrahim because Allah said so. And the knife wouldn't cut the neck of Ismail because Allah said so. So the universe, our worldview of the universe as Muslims is that it is possible for natural law to be overridden by the creator of those natural laws, the controller of the universe. The idea that natural laws apply to both humanity and nature and assign no special status to humanity. You know, the whole enterprise of science can be seen as, and since the Renaissance, developing this concept. Of course, Copernicus' theory was, you know, it overturned the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe. So we're just off in a corner of a particular galaxy, which is, there's no indication that it's center to anything. And in that sense, I mean, we don't have, as a Muslim, I have no problem with Copernicus' theory. I mean, the evidence for it is overwhelming. And Darwin's theory was doing that on another level for humanity. That, you know, human beings are just, you know, we just develop seamlessly from nature. We're essentially an ape with a larger brain. So leaving aside the whole concept of evolution, we would take exception with that based on all of those Quranic statements and the statements of the Prophet ﷺ that we all came from a single being, Adam, and his mate. The concept that the change that's going on around us, it's not moving towards any goal, and therefore it's purposeless. This is the whole basis of what the dominant philosophical position among intellectuals in the West now, which is called postmodernism, which is that everything is meaningless. That's the eventual implication of this concept. Nothing has any meaning at all. And so the people who then write essays and develop philosophies based upon this concept, and the question sometimes should arise, which is, why are you bothering to talk about any of this if it doesn't mean anything? And you know, one of the embarrassments of this postmodernist movement, because they're so into using incredibly complicated language to express this idea, which is basically that nothing means anything, somebody just wanted to show them up. You know, it's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. And he wrote on purpose a long essay that he understood to be complete nonsense. And he submitted it to one of these journals that publishes these kinds of articles. And they accepted it for publication, and they wrote a glowing introduction to it that, you know, this fresh thinker has broken new ground in the field. And then he came out and announced that actually the whole thing was just nonsense. The time now is so short, so I'll just get to one final point. Actually, I took this, the title of this lecture from a book, which I haven't read, but the title caught me, Man's Search for Meaning. It's the English title of a book by a psychoanalyst named Viktor Frankl. He was a student of Freud, but he split with Freud. Freud said that the basic human need is the drive for pleasure. And Frankl said, no, the basic human need is the drive for meaning. And one of the things that caused him to arrive at this understanding was that he was put in a concentration camp during World War II. And he saw a lot of people die. And although he personally, he doesn't believe in God or anything, but he said, as long as you have something to believe in, you can keep on living. One of the things that he noticed, he said, when a prisoner he had given up the will to live, they could always tell that, okay, this guy, he's on his way out. You know, he's doomed. They could tell about such people because they would start saying, what's the use? Everything is meaningless. And then a person who starts expressing that, then the next stage was that he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And of course, the guards were brutal. They would come in and they would beat these guys with sticks to make them get out of bed. And people who had reached that stage, they wouldn't move. Whether they were beaten, kicked, everything. You do everything to them, and he'd just lie there. He said, despite that, he said, if one of those people was left, you know, they didn't beat him to death or kick him to death when he wouldn't get out of bed, he said, you'd see a guy like that who has decided that there's absolutely nothing to live for. If he got a cigarette, he'd be lying on the bed smoking the cigarette. So there's still, despite the decision or the conclusion intellectually and philosophically that there's no reason to stay alive, there was still the animal self seeking pleasure. And you know, the implications of that for the world in which we live. People who have no reason in their minds, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? So that question has not been answered in the lives of so many people. And so there's a hole inside which has to be filled with something. And the something that is used to fill that hole is the pursuit of pleasure. Drugs, loveless sex, and physical sensation, consuming mindless entertainment, especially violent entertainment. All of these are manifestations of this philosophy taken to its ultimate. And one final word, a human being should not be like a frog. You know, that's the level on which a frog lives. It's operating completely on stimulus response. If a fly passes in front of a frog, its tongue shoots out and wraps around that fly and sucks it into its mouth. A frog, if you surround it up to its chin with dead flies, it will starve to death because it doesn't recognize that fly as food unless it's moving. It's completely wired for stimulus response. And Allah created a human being bi ahsani taqweem, in the finest form, in the finest station, and then reduce them to the lowest of the low, except for those who believe and do good deeds. So being reduced to the lowest of the low is to operate like a frog, when you as a human being were made for something so much higher than that. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ فَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْكَرِيمِ. Did you think that we created you for nothing and that you would not be returned to us? So exalted be Allah, the sovereign, the absolute truth. There is no deity except Him, and He is the Lord of the gracious throne. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.